Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is completing final preparations for a night flight to Beijing.
Would you fasten your seatbelt now, please?
227 passengers are on board. 152 of them are Chinese citizens. Malaysian 370 is their red-eye flight home.
Fuel pumps.
In the cockpit,
Check.
Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah is in command, an experienced pilot who's been with the airline for 33 years. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid
Flap set.
is far less experienced. This is his first time flying a Boeing 777 without an instructor.
4 takeoff checklist complete. We're ready to go, Captain.
Good. The process of takeoff in any commercial airliner is a busy period.
Former Air Force and airline pilot John Nance is an internationally recognized expert in aviation safety.
This is one of the reasons that worldwide, starting in the US many years ago, we said, look, sterile cockpit under 10,000 feet, no extraneous talking, because you got a lot to concentrate on.
Malaysia 370, runway 32 right. You are clear for takeoff.
32 right. Cleared for takeoff. Malaysian 370, thank you.
Why don't you tell them we're ready to go?
Flight attendants, please take your seats for takeoff.
40 minutes after midnight, Flight 370 is cleared for takeoff.
Okay, here we go.
The crew monitors the speed as they accelerate down the runway.
V1. Rotate.
The takeoff seems completely routine. As the plane climbs, the controller directs the crew towards a navigational waypoint called Igari.
Malaysia 370, turn right direct to Igari.
Okay, direct Igari. Malaysia 370, thank you.
The 777 is one of the most automated airplanes in the world. The crew can simply enter the location of the waypoint into their flight computer.
Igari is entered. Please confirm.
Execute.
Flying a big airplane like the 777 is really managing the airplane because there's not a lot of flying stick and rudder involved. It's a lot of management of a very sophisticated amount of electronics.
Malaysian 370's flight path will now take them along the air corridor that runs northeast over the Gulf of Thailand, before continuing on to Beijing. The trip takes about 6 hours.
Malaysia 370, maintaining level 350.
20 minutes after takeoff, they reach cruising altitude, 35,000 feet.
When you get a big jet up to altitude and you've got her on autopilot, you've leveled off, you've run your cruise checklist, it really is time now to kind of throw the straps off and relax a little bit.
The crew will now monitor the autopilot until they're ready to land. Controllers in Kuala Lumpur will only track the plane while it's in Malaysian airspace, about 20 minutes more. As the plane crosses the Gulf of Thailand, controllers in Vietnam will take over. The controller in Kuala Lumpur makes one last transmission at 1:19 a.m.
370, contact Ho Chi Minh, 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysia 370.
When we found out what was said from the cockpit of Malaysian Flight 370, it was perfectly routine, absolutely boilerplate. That's what airline pilots and flight controllers say to each other.
The crew is expected to contact Vietnamese controllers in less than 1 minute. But 19 minutes later, there's no word from Flight 370.
Malaysian 370, this is Ho Chi Minh. Please contact control.
Malaysia 370.
Controllers in Vietnam and Malaysia tried desperately to reach the missing plane.
Contact control.
Malaysia 370, do you copy? Malaysia 370, this is Kuala Lumpur. Do you copy?
There's no response from the cockpit, and no sign of the plane on radar. Flight 370 has vanished without a trace.
It is unprecedented for an airplane to disappear from the radar environment like this and go unaccounted for.
Malcolm Brenner is widely recognized as one of the world's leading experts in the causes of aviation disasters. He's studied human performance for NASA and the US Air Force and has investigated dozens of major accidents for the National Transportation Safety Board.
This accident has caught the attention of the world in a way I have not seen in a 40-year career in aviation.
This was probably going to be the #1 mystery in commercial aviation history and aviation history, in fact. Everybody had looked to Amelia Earhart as the #1. I think this clearly displaces it.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, we are deeply saddened this morning with the news on MH370.
Stunned family members demand answers from the airline, while aviation experts worldwide scramble to try to explain what might have happened to the missing plane.
In that situation, everything's on the table, including disorientation, smoke, fire, mid-air collision, you name it.
Finding out what caused this disappearance is crucial for the entire aviation industry.
If it's a mechanical problem, it needs to be corrected. If it's a security breach of some type, that needs to be corrected. If it was something wrong with the cargo, whatever the issue was, has to be rectified.
Malaysian authorities immediately launch a massive search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Australia, the US, and China soon join the hunt.
In the first couple of days, we really had no idea what to think, except that we couldn't find the airplane.
It's difficult to know where to look. Flight 370 has disappeared over the Gulf of Thailand, where there is limited radar coverage.
Radar systems are on about 10% of the surface of the Earth. As you can imagine, there are no radar systems other than shipborne ones over the oceans. So you have a physical inability to cover much of the Earth's surface where it's ocean.
No ships in the region reported spotting a plane on radar. And there's no sign of any floating aircraft debris. Desperate to save any potential crash survivors, searchers turn to another technology. It's called ACARS, Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. The ACARS system uses satellites to transmit information between the ground and the aircraft in flight. Chris McLaughlin is a vice president at Inmarsat, the company that runs the satellite network.
It's a primary form of communication between the controllers and the airline itself and the pilots in the air. ACARS was intended to be a link with no concept that you'd ever be able to track an aircraft with it, because why would you need to? Because you were in communications with it.
Unlike GPS, ACARS does not provide constant location data, but what it does provide is vital information on how the plane is performing, including, crucially, its fuel load. This allows investigators to estimate how far it could have flown. But without knowing the direction of flight, it's not much to go on. The search area grows to more than 100,000 square miles.
The element that I think was the most startling was, what do you mean we didn't know where this airplane was? What do you mean we lost track of something as big as a 777?
This isn't the first time that an airliner has vanished. Air France Flight 447 disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean in 2009. Though floating debris was found within days, it took nearly 2 years to find the sunken wreckage. Leopold Sartorius was a key investigator during that search.
In the case of the Malaysian, apparently the search area is at least 3 to 4 times bigger than the original Air France 447 search area, which already was quite huge.
French investigators ultimately conclude that the pilots on Air France Flight 447 made a series of stunning errors leading to the crash. That conclusion would have been impossible without the undersea recovery of the plane's black boxes.
What do you think? What do we need to do?
I don't know. It's going down.
We had much more than investigators seem to have today in the case of Malaysian. But already with all we had, it was very difficult to reach conclusions without getting the flight recorders.
In the search for Flight 370, there's no time to lose. Ocean currents could already be moving the flight recorders, or worse, burying them under silt. A careful review of the passenger manifest by Malaysian police turns up an alarming lead. 2 passengers boarded the plane illegally.
Very early in the case, it was determined that there were passengers using stolen passports that were in the Interpol database as stolen passports.
It suddenly seems possible that Flight 370 hasn't crashed after all. Perhaps hijackers somehow seized control of the plane.
I began to develop a hope, because it didn't appear that there was any wreckage in the water, that this was not only a hijacking, but that it was a hostage-taking, and we would hear a demand for 200-some-odd hostages to be repatriated if certain things were done. That was the best hope.
Contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Since 9/11, mid-air hijackings are extremely unlikely.
You want me to grab you a coffee?
No, I'm good.
But not impossible.
One thing you learn in any form of accident investigation is you rule nothing out.
If the captain or the co-pilot need to use a restroom, they come out of that cockpit.
Tom Fuentes is uniquely qualified to consider how a hijacking might unfold. He spent 29 years with the FBI.
So all the security in the world means nothing when they leave the controlled environment of the cockpit.
Take me to the cockpit, or I'll kill her.
Okay, just don't hurt anyone. What do you want?
Open the cockpit door.
Okay.
Now.
Okay.
The lack of any demands would be unusual, but hijackings don't always go according to plan. Could the disappearance of Flight 370 be a case of a hijacking gone wrong?
There are always possibilities that whatever the plan was in Malaysian, that it failed. That for one reason or another, it did not work out as expected, and that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to understand.
One such failed hijacking took place in 1996, aboard Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. The Boeing 767 was on a routine trip from Addis Ababa to the Ivory Coast when 3 young Ethiopians made their move.
Get out. Get out! Fly to Australia.
What?
Fly us to Australia.
We don't have enough fuel to get to Australia.
We have a bomb. If you don't do what we tell you to, we will blow this plane out of the sky.
We only have 2 hours of fuel.
The hijackers didn't believe the captain when he told them the 767 was going to run out of fuel. 3 hours later, near the Comoros Islands, the jet hit the water at more than 230 miles per hour. "125 of the 175 people on board were killed, including all of the hijackers. Did a hijacker force his way into the cockpit of Flight 370?
Just stay calm. I'm entering the heading now, see?
I thought, that there was a very strong possibility that if that plane turned around, it could have crashed into the jungles of Malaysia or into the jungles of Indonesia. If it went through all of the vegetation into a swamp, which would keep it from, the fire from being found, that it would be very easy for a plane to crash in the jungle and not be found.
Agencies around the world scour radar records for clues. Then, on March the 11th,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
3 days after the plane's disappearance, the Malaysian military releases radar data that seems to support the hijacking theory. 3 minutes after its last radio call, Flight 370 made a sharp turn off course.
The moment that it appeared that there was a shadowy trace of this airplane making a left turn immediately after the last radio call with air traffic control, the possibility of hijack jumps into your face.
That possibility seems even more likely when photos from a previous flight co-piloted by Farid Hamid spark speculation that he didn't always keep the cockpit secure.
If you got flight crews who are, shall we say, prone to break the rules and let somebody up there because they just want to do that in a camaraderie way, they could open the door to anybody. It might be a pretty girl, but that pretty girl might have a Confederate and a gun in her purse.
They may have only had a smaller weapon of some kind or pretended to have a weapon. Now they get in there and, they have what they need.
Fly this plane to Australia now.
Kill him!
In the media frenzy surrounding the disappearance of Flight 370, there is talk of a possible hijacking. But for aviation experts, something about the theory doesn't fit.
I just need to check my charts. Is that all right?
Hurry up.
Pilots have several ways to send emergency signals to the ground.
Okay, just calm down. I'm entering the headings now, see?
You've got radios to talk on, you've got emergency frequencies, you can put something in the ACARS system and type it in, and you've got a code that you can put into the transponder that instantly lets the world of aviation know you've been hijacked.
They refer to that as squawking. It's sending out a special frequency that would go back to the control tower and to the airline and say, this is the hijacking code.
But air traffic controllers never received a squawked code or any other alert from Flight 370. And an intensive police investigation has lifted suspicion from the passengers traveling on stolen passports.
They certainly had no links to terrorism.
In fact, no one on board seems to have any connection with any terrorist group.
We're talking of thousands of people looked at, interviews being done, families, inquiries made with families. And I think that at least the public should realize that this was a very, very extensive investigation.
370, contact Ho Chi Minh, 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysia 370.
With armed hijacking looking less likely, authorities focus on the few existing leads in the case, including some troubling timing. 2 minutes after the last voice communication from the cockpit, Flight 370's transponder cuts out. Transponders transmit information like flight number and position to controllers on the ground. Losing that signal makes it harder to track the plane. Even more troubling, a few minutes after the transponder cuts out, the signal from the ACARS system also switches off.
Turning off the transponder is extremely straightforward, extremely simple, even on a sophisticated jet like the 777. Turning off an ACARS is not so simple. It takes a lot of knowledge.
It's difficult to imagine a routine glitch that would cause the sudden loss of both systems. The answer probably lies elsewhere.
Got a fire on board.
There are only two things after a while that begin to parse out. One is that this was a purposeful act, and the other is a massive emergency.
I need you to stay seated and use this to breathe.
Losing a lot of systems here.
An onboard fire is one of the most catastrophic emergencies a crew can face.
Transponder's out. And I've got an error on the hydraulics.
It can damage multiple systems, including electronics,
There goes the ACARS.
sometimes
Masks on.
in unpredictable ways.
A fire such as that could affect the electrical system, and so conceivably you could lose some capabilities.
In November of 1987, a South African Airways 747 was bound for Johannesburg. Fire broke out in its cargo area on the main deck directly behind the passengers. By the time the crew got to it, the fire was raging.
We'll check the breaker panel as well.
The captain initiated an emergency descent.
Mauritius, Springbok 2905.
Springbok 2905, Mauritius, good morning, go ahead.
Good morning. We have a smoke problem and we're doing emergency descent to level 15.
Thick, noxious smoke filled the cabin, and the captain lost power to key instruments.
We've lost a lot of electric. We haven't done anything on the aircraft.
The South African 747 never made it home. 159 people died when the plane hit the Indian Ocean. The cargo manifest from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 reveals it was carrying some potentially dangerous cargo. 487 pounds of highly flammable lithium-ion batteries. Is it possible that they sparked a catastrophic fire?
Did the amount of, or the weight of lithium-ion batteries exceed normal standards considered to be safe? Or did they violate that and put too much on and then maybe put it in the wrong cargo area where the fire suppressant wasn't as robust as where it's supposed to be?
We've got a fire on board.
Mayday, Mayday. This is Malaysian 370. We have a fire on board.
There goes the A-cars.
A sudden fire might explain both the failure of the cockpit instruments and the abrupt left turn.
I think we should turn around. Head back to the airport.
All right. Turning left, heading 240.
Perhaps the crew was changing course to prepare for an emergency landing.
The crews do have oxygen, and one of the first things they do in the event of fire or smoke is to don the oxygen, and that will give them at least an hour of oxygen they can work with. So there is that possibility.
But the fire theory has a major flaw.
The main problem with the fire scenario, not seeming likely to me, is the number one thing is that there was no radio call.
The cargo bay's fire alarm should have sounded before the fire had spread.
The first thing that I'm going to do is oxygen mask on 100%, make sure my buddy over here has his or her oxygen mask on. We're going to declare an emergency immediately. We're going to turn the airplane around. We're going to look for the nearest suitable airport.
There's another compelling reason to doubt that a fire brought down Flight 370. In London, a small team of engineers at Inmarsat has made a startling discovery.
The team began looking on Sunday and initially found something they couldn't quite believe.
What they've uncovered immediately casts a troubling new light on the mysterious events aboard Flight 370. Inmarsat technicians have made a stunning discovery. Deep in the ACAR's data, they've uncovered a series of automated signals, or handshakes, received from Flight 370 long after it was assumed to have crashed.
It's done through an invisible handshake or ping between the network and the unit itself.
The plane's ACAR's computer continued to answer the automated pings from the Inmarsat ground station every hour from 2:25 a.m. until 8:19 a.m.
The aircraft was continuing to signal a request for service, not for minutes up to the loss, but for over 7 hours after it had disappeared from the radar system.
The discovery means Flight 370 did not crash into the Gulf of Thailand, but was in the air for another 7 hours.
What changed everything to me and everybody else was the Inmarsat satellite data. That's what says, wait a minute, that plane flew for hours.
A 7-hour flight makes it nearly impossible to believe a fire brought down the plane.
If you have a generalized fire, the airplane is not going to be capable of flying that many hours.
The timing matches earlier ACAR's data about Flight 370's fuel consumption. the plane had enough fuel to keep flying on autopilot for 7 hours. But no one knows what was happening on board during all that time.
We now know that it went in a certain direction. We know that it went thousands of miles out there. It flew for hours. Whether anybody was alive or not, we don't know.
Once the plane's fuel tanks ran dry, the two engines would have cut out one after another, putting the 777 into a downward spiral until it crashed into the sea. The new scenario bears a striking resemblance to another mysterious accident. In August 2005, Helios Flight 522 was en route from Cyprus to Athens.
Operations, this is Flight 522, over.
Flight 522, what can I do for you?
We have a takeoff config warning on.
In the cabin, oxygen masks suddenly dropped. To the pilots, the alarms made no sense. And then the plane went silent. An hour and a half later, the Greek Air Force scrambled 2 fighter jets to investigate. They spotted someone slumped over the controls in the first officer's seat. But there was no sign of the captain.
CC, there is one figure in the cockpit of Helios 522. He appears non-responsive.
They saw someone moving in the cockpit just before the 737 suddenly turned and made a quick descent. As the plane sped downward, the person in the cockpit finally acknowledged the fighter jet. But no words were exchanged. Moments later, Helios Flight 522 slammed into the ground. An investigation into the Helios crash revealed that the previous cabin crew had reported seeing ice on the rear service door. A ground engineer investigating the problem ran tests that required him to switch the cabin pressurization control from automatic to manual. But he didn't switch it back. When the plane took off again, the cabin didn't pressurize automatically and oxygen levels began to drop.
Hypoxia can result in headaches, confusion, difficulty understanding what's happening, memory loss, shortness of breath. And what's especially sinister about hypoxia, and this, all pilots are warned about this, is that you don't recognize that you're impaired.
Overhead masks deploy when cabin pressure gets too low, but they only supply oxygen for about 12 minutes. Slowly starved of oxygen, the passengers and crew drifted off to sleep.
Everyone on the plane was unconscious, with the exception of one flight attendant who somehow had received oxygen.
By the time that flight attendant reached the cockpit, the plane was out of fuel. There was no way for him to save the plane.
Put on your mask! Put on your mask!
Did Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 suffer a pressurization failure and fly for hours on autopilot just like Helios 522?
Generally, an airplane is on autopilot for most of the flight. So in case both pilots could not pilot the airplane anymore, the autopilot would do what it's supposed to do.
The Malaysian flight was flying at 35,000 feet. This is higher than Mount Everest. And without oxygen, you can expect 30 to 60 seconds of useful consciousness.
An Australian Transport Safety Board report helps narrow the search area with the finding that Flight 370's straight and level path in the final hours is consistent with an onboard hypoxia event. But there are some troubling details that suggest something was very wrong aboard Flight 370.
Be right back.
All right, thanks.
Well before hypoxia could ever have set in.
Hypoxia and disorientation is not consistent with turns that are made that would never have been programmed into the computer, even in the wildest imagination.
Careful analysis of the evidence has revealed that Flight 370 made 3 turns over the next hour and a half after the last radio call. First a turn to the left, then 2 more, taking the plane west, then south towards Antarctica. For Malcolm Brenner, those turns strongly suggest someone in the cockpit deliberately flew the plane off course.
It is conceivable that a pilot could deliberately depressurize the airplane. That as part of an effort to hijack the airplane or take it for some purpose, it would be possible from the cockpit to turn off the pressurization and produce a Helios-type event.
The big questions now: who made those mysterious turns? And why?
370, contact Ho Chi Minh, 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Investigators are struggling to explain a series of mysterious turns made by Flight 370 after its last radio call.
That's weird. The transponder just went off.
Anything else affected?
Hang on. Now the ACARS is out too.
You always want to have an open mind. Catastrophic failures can happen. You want to consider that.
If multiple flight systems failed at the same time, it's possible the problem might have confused the pilots.
Damn thing's still not working. Maybe I'll try rebooting it.
Yeah. Hang on. Let me take a look.
Is that our altitude?
Damn it!
But when considering all the facts of Flight 370, that scenario just doesn't stand up. The 777 is designed to have multiple backups, making it extremely unlikely that enough systems could fail to put the flight in jeopardy.
The whole watchword is to let these airplanes do much of the work of making sure everything is backed up, including the backups.
Multiple failures are also hard to reconcile with the fact that the plane kept flying for 7 hours.
It just doesn't seem to fit the evidence we know of the flight.
For investigators like Brenner, the evidence makes it hard to ignore a rare and horrifying possibility: that Flight 370 was brought down by a deliberate human act.
2 different systems went out at a similar time, the transponder and the ACARS. The only purpose of these systems is to communicate with the ground. And there's no obvious electrical connection why both would be going out, other than a human involvement.
Everything comes down to deliberate action by somebody for some reason.
If Malaysia Flight 370 was brought down on purpose, it wouldn't be the first time for a commercial airliner.
There are 6 accidents over the last 40 years around the world that have aspects of a deliberate action. In several cases, they appear to be impulsive, but in 2 cases, it appears that the pilots, although they were having psychiatric problems, they appeared to have careful planning and deliberately wanted to hide the fact that what they were doing would be a crime.
That was the controversial finding made by a team of US investigators after the tragic crash of Silkair Flight 185.
We'll be serving lunch shortly.
On December the 19th, 1997, the Boeing 737 was flying from Jakarta to Singapore.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. My name is Zhu Wei Ming. On the flight deck this afternoon, with me is First Officer Duncan Ward.
Moments after the crew's last scheduled radio call to Indonesian controllers, the plane banked sharply and went into a steep dive. There were no survivors. Searchers managed to recover the Silkair flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder.
Ready when you are.
But both machines were switched off before the plane went into its fatal dive.
I am. Water.
Investigators discovered the plane's pilot, Zhu Wei Ming, had recently lost more than $1 million in the stock market and was scheduled to repay the debt when he got back to Singapore. Though Indonesian investigators disagree, US investigators believe the Silk Air captain most likely disabled the flight recorders and put the plane into a dive, killing 97 passengers and 7 crew.
Malaysia 370, maintaining level 350.
Some experts now believe Flight 370 was also deliberately brought down.
So in my mind, somebody did this, and it was a pilot. Whether it was one of the 2 individuals up front who were charged with keeping that plane safe, or whether it was somebody else, we do not know.
Cruising at 35,000 feet.
Could you grab me a coffee while I finish checking this?
Yes, Captain.
The captain of Malaysia 370 could have found an excuse to get the first officer out of the cockpit.
Be right back.
Thanks.
The captain of the flight has an authority. He is the pilot in command of the flight. He can direct the first officer to go back to the cabin for various reasons, whereas the first officer cannot. So, of the 2 of them, the captain would be of greater attention.
Can I get a coffee for the captain?
Alone in the cockpit, it would have been simple to switch off the transponder and change course towards an area with little radar coverage.
Hey, open up in there.
A few minutes later, he may have tried to switch off the ACARS, not realizing that part of the signal would stay on.
Go right in there.
You can't turn off the handshakes for Inmarsat without actually getting into the electronics of the aircraft itself. That's just something that people wouldn't know how to do.
Captain!
A pilot can stop the door being opened from the outside.
Open the door.
And it's designed to be extremely secure when locked.
The hardened door, no one else is getting in, good, bad, or otherwise. So if a good guy is in there, yeah, they're locked in. If a bad guy's in there, he's in there safe too.
If the captain of Flight 370 took control of the cockpit and hijacked his own plane,
Captain, open the door.
It's unlikely that anyone else on board could have raised an alarm.
As far as communication on an emergency basis from the cabin crew to the ground, you're almost always going to be unsuccessful with a cell phone.
Hey, Captain, open up in there.
And there really is no method of just picking up the phone, bypassing the cockpit, and calling the ground. You're pretty much along for the ride.
Captain, open the door.
Cabin pressure can be adjusted manually, a safety feature in case it malfunctions. But that also makes it possible to incapacitate everyone else on board.
Hey, you all right?
That's one consideration in terms of neutralizing the other crew member or other crew members.
Captain.
Anyone who is not on oxygen would be vulnerable.
Passengers who managed to put on their masks would have run out of oxygen in about 12 minutes. With passengers and crew dead, all that's left is to make the plane disappear.
The flight over the next hour makes several more turns which appear to be human-directed, and finally ends up flying in a heading to Antarctica. So the appearance is that this is a carefully thought-out effort to evade detection.
You know, I feel very strongly, very, very strongly, given all the evidence that we think we have, we always have to put that caveat on it, that whoever did this intended for the airplane and the passengers to simply vanish from the planet.
If Flight 370 was in fact brought down on purpose, one of the most difficult questions to answer is why.
Between the two pilots, the captain and the first officer was an exuberant, brand new young pilot who's just getting ready to get married. There were absolutely no earmarks that would be consistent with either a religious zealot or somebody who wants to end his life, let alone that of everybody else aboard. But you turn to the captain, and there are no earmarks there either.
Malcolm Brenner thinks an event from 1994 may provide some insight.
For me, the clearest model is the FedEx example. And the only reason we know about that clearly is because it failed.
A FedEx flight engineer, at risk of being fired for lying, boarded a DC-10 with concealed weapons.
He had a history of being quite brilliant. He was an engineer, he had a good Air Force record, but he also had a history of psychiatric problems.
Shortly after takeoff, he burst into the cockpit planning to kill the crew and crash the plane. He almost succeeded. After a bloody struggle, the crew managed to restrain their attacker and land the plane. Malaysia Airlines may be the latest of a small handful of airlines that have suffered the tragedy of a disturbed pilot deliberately setting out to crash a commercial plane.
You can have someone who can have psychiatric motivation, a bizarre effort, but still be able to cold-bloodedly plan in detail a way to commit this kind of effort. So I'm sorry to say it can happen.
The difficult reality for investigators and airlines alike is that human failures can be nearly impossible to foresee.
If we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with imperfect creatures. That's us. And we can learn more and should learn more about the earmarks of somebody who might do this. But it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to say, yeah, we've locked this down now, it can never happen again.
It's possible no one will ever know for certain exactly what happened aboard Flight 370. But perhaps the most important lesson from this tragedy has already been learned.
The one lesson that I think immediately comes out of this is that we've got to know where all these airplanes are all the time, and that's very simple to do and very inexpensive. You simply hook a GPS up to one of those transmitters that in most cases are already there and cause it to send its position about every 5 or 10 minutes and make sure that nobody in the airplane can turn it off.
Maybe one of the first things that will happen is that individual airlines will decide we are going to track and make that a point of difference in the way they sell their tickets. Maybe another thing that will happen is that the US FAA will simply mandate it.
The whole world